There's a woman right now, maybe it's you. It's 1,000 p.m. on a Tuesday, and the house is completely still. No one is asking you what's for dinner. No one is fighting over the remote, and for the first time in decades, the only person you have to manage is yourself. You tell people you've never been happier, but if you're being honest, some nights that silence starts to feel incredibly heavy. I'm Emma, and today we're looking at the psychology of the Gen X lone wolf. We're going to uncover why your hyper-independence isn't just a personality trait, but a survival skill that might be costing you more than you realize. By the end of this, you'll understand the real reason you built this quiet kingdom, and why you've been performing peace so well that even you can't tell the difference anymore. Now let's continue. In 1970, only about 7 of midlife adults in America had never married. By 2020, that number had climbed to nearly 29. That's a 4-fold jump in 50 years, and Gen X women sit right at the center of it. Pew Research data shows that by 2019, a significant share of women between 25 and 54 were living without a partner, not married, not cohabiting, and that share had risen sharply since 1990. The National Center for Family and Marriage Research at Bowling Green State University confirms it Gen X women are the demographic pivot point of this entire shift. Now, the way most people talk about this, they frame it like something that happened to women. Like solo living is a consolation prize for a life that didn't go according to plan. But that framing misses something important. For a lot of Gen X women, this life wasn't a default. It was a slow, compounding series of choices. She chose the job offer over the relationship that wasn't quite right. She chose her own apartment when the lease ran out. She chose not to push a relationship toward marriage when her gut said it wasn't there. None of those felt like big decisions at the time, but choices stack. Think about the woman who spent her 30s saying not yet to marriage. Not because she was against it, she just wasn't ready, or the right person hadn't arrived, or she was too busy building something to stop and audit her personal life. Then she looked up at 48 and realized the life around her had quietly shaped itself around one person. Her routines, her finances, her space. It all fit exactly one person, and it fit perfectly. Society still looks at that woman and sees a waiting room. Someone passing time until the real thing starts. But the data tells a different story. Gen X women aren't waiting. A growing number of them have already decided this is the destination, not a layover. And that distinction matters because it changes everything about how we read this life, including the parts that are genuinely hard. More than 90 of the people watching this video right now are not subscribed. If you're starting to realize that your hyper-independence isn't just a personality trait, but a survival skill you've been carrying since childhood, you're exactly where you need to be. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell. Share this with one person who needs to hear this. Now let's continue. So what does a regular day actually look like for one of these women? It depends on who you ask, because they're not all the same person. But a lot of them have built a routine so well-tuned that people on the outside mistake it for loneliness. The morning starts with coffee made exactly the way she wants it. No one else's preferences in the equation. No one asking her to use a different roast or complaining the pot ran out. That sounds small, but psychologically it isn't. That cup of coffee is a daily, concrete reminder that this space belongs entirely to her. She checks her phone not for a partner's texts, but for news. Maybe a group chat with 2 or 3 women she's known since the 1990s. She goes to work, or she has a project. Could be the promotion she's been chasing. Could be the novel she started 3 years ago. Could be a kitchen renovation she is doing entirely on her own schedule. The evening belongs to her completely. Dinner at 500 or dinner at 900, depending on what she feels like. No emotional labor owed to someone walking through the door. No reading the room. No managing someone else's bad day before she's processed her own. People on the outside look at this life and see absence. She looks at it and sees architecture. Something she designed deliberately over years and keeps refining. She tends to fall into one of 2 camps. There's the woman who fills every hour Work, exercise, projects, always something moving because stillness makes her uncomfortable. And there's the woman who sits with the silence like it's a familiar chair. She reads. She watches something she actually wants to watch. She lets a Saturday afternoon go by without justifying it to anyone. Both of these women are managing the same underlying reality, a life with no built-in accountability partner. Nobody asking what she's doing today. Nobody noticing if she skips a workout or makes pasta for the 4th time this week. She cooks an elaborate meal for herself and doesn't apologize for it. She grows a garden that produces more tomatoes than one woman could ever eat, and she gives them to neighbors she barely talks to. For some of them, that freedom is the entire point. For others, it's the thing that quietly costs them more than they admit. But how did she get here? Because there's more than one road to this address. How did she get here? There are 2 roads, and they lead to the same quiet apartment through completely different terrain. The first is the woman who never married. She wasn't protesting anything. She wasn't wounded or waiting. She was just building a career, a city, a version of herself. And the years moved fast when you were busy. She had relationships. Some of them ran for 3 or 4 years. Some of them were genuinely good. They just never tipped into something permanent. And at a certain point, she stopped expecting them to. Pew Research found that by 2019, a significant and growing share of women in their 30s and 40s were unpartnered, not cohabiting, not married. And that number had been climbing steadily since 1990. What the data also shows is that the longer you live alone, the more your habits, your finances, and your emotional rhythms calibrate to one person. Re-entry into a partnership doesn't just feel uncomfortable after a decade of solo living. It becomes genuinely difficult, like trying to fit new furniture into a room that was measured for something else entirely. She didn't wake up one day and decide she preferred solitude. She just kept moving forward, and somewhere along the way, the life around her quietly shaped itself around a single occupant. By the time someone asked her why she never settled down, the honest answer was, because the life I built already fits. The second road is different in almost every way. This is the woman who is married. She raised children, or she didn't, but either way she held the structure of a shared life together for years. She remembered the anniversaries. She organized the dinners. She kept track of which friends needed checking on and which relatives hadn't called in a while. And then through a divorce she chose, or one that was chosen for her, or through widowhood, or simply a decision she made at 52 that she couldn't explain to anyone's satisfaction, she found herself alone. This woman isn't rediscovering solitude. She's meeting it for the first time. And that is an entirely different experience from Road 1. In a lot of marriages and families, women function as the social infrastructure. They are the load-bearing wall that holds the whole structure up. When that role ends, the social world doesn't gradually thin out. It collapses. Not loudly, quietly, over about 6 months. You realize the couple friends were really his friends. The social calendar was really your labor. The network you thought belonged to both of you belonged in practice to the role you played inside the marriage. Picture a woman who walks away from a 22-year marriage and discovers, by the following spring, that she hasn't lost just a husband. She's lost an entire ecosystem. The shared history, the mutual friends, the built-in plans every weekend. What she's left with is a quiet apartment and the sudden, disorienting task of figuring out who she is when she isn't organizing everyone else's life. Same silence, same empty calendar. 2 completely different psychological starting points. And that social collapse, that invisible erosion, is where the story starts getting more complicated. Here's what makes the social collapse harder for Gen X women specifically. AARP data shows that 46% adults between 45 and 59 report feeling lonely, and that number is actually higher than the rates for people in their 60s and 70s. The Gen X window isn't just a difficult stretch, it's the hardest one on the chart. Now, research is consistent on one thing about how women connect. They do it face to face. Not shoulder to shoulder, doing something together and calling it bonding. Women talk. They sit across from each other. They make eye contact. They go through the actual texture of their lives out loud. That kind of connection isn't just preferred for women. It's how emotional processing happens. It's how stress drops. It's how you feel known. The problem is that face-to-face requires proximity. And proximity, by the time you're 50, is something most women no longer have with the people who matter most to them. Women's friendships tend to run on shared context. Work, kids, the same neighborhood, the same school pickup line, the same gym class on Thursday morning. Those structures create natural, low-effort contact. You don't have to schedule seeing each other because life schedules it for you. But when the kids grow up, when the job changes, when someone moves, those anchors lift. And without them, the friendship doesn't automatically die. It just goes quiet. Both women assume the other is busy. Neither one knows how to maintain something that used to maintain itself. The Cigna 2025 Loneliness Report puts a number on the result. 60 of Gen X adults qualify as lonely, higher than boomers. And these aren't people who look like they're struggling. They have jobs and homes and routines. They have friends, technically. They just haven't had a real, unguarded conversation with one of those friends in longer than they want to admit. The loneliness doesn't announce itself. It looks like a woman who is busy, who is managing, who has her routines running smoothly and doesn't need anything from anyone. If you asked her directly, she'd probably redirect the conversation. She'd mention a project she's working on or something she just read. The gap between her and the people she loves doesn't feel like loneliness to her. It just feels like how life is now. There is one thing worth holding on to, though. Loneliness decreases as people move past 60. The research on this has held up across multiple rounds of AARP surveys going back to 2010. The woman who is struggling at 53, who finds the silence too big some evenings, may feel genuinely different at 67. That's not a promise, but it's a real pattern, and it matters. So does she love this life or hate it? The honest answer for most of these women is both, sometimes in the same afternoon. On the right, Saturday, weather good, house clean, nothing on the calendar she didn't put there herself. There is genuinely nothing better. She is the architect, the tenant, and the landlord all at once. The money is hers. The silence is hers. The thermostat is set to whatever temperature she actually wants, and nobody has touched it. The remote is exactly where she left it. There are no arguments about paint colors, no negotiations about whose turn it is to deal with the thing that needs dealing with. Every corner of this life is hers, shaped entirely by her own choices, and on those afternoons, she wouldn't trade it for anything. That's real. Don't let anyone tell you it isn't. But there's the other side, the side she doesn't post about, doesn't bring up at dinner, doesn't hand to anyone. A difficult medical result comes back, and she sits with it alone in her car for 20 minutes before she drives home, because there's no one waiting who she needs to prepare herself to face. A holiday passes without a single phone call, not because she's been forgotten, but because everyone assumed she was fine. The moment just before sleep, when the house makes a noise somewhere in the dark, and there's no one next to her to say, "Did you hear that?" Not because she's afraid, but because there's something specific about that small exchange, that tiny piece of being witnessed, that she hasn't had in years. That's where being alone and feeling alone stop being the same thing. A lot of Gen X women have practiced independence for so long that the distance between those two states has blurred completely. Being alone is a fact about your living situation. Feeling alone is something that happens inside you, regardless of who's in the building. They can overlap, and for a long time, she's managed to keep them separate. She's proud of that. It's not nothing. But hyper-independence at a certain level of intensity isn't just a personality trait. Psychologists increasingly describe it as a trauma response, a coping strategy that formed under pressure and then calcified into identity. For Gen X women who came home to empty houses after school, who figured things out themselves because asking wasn't really an option, who learned early that needing people came with a cost, Self-reliance wasn't a choice they made. It was a skill they built because survival required it. Asking for company now at 54, at 57, at 61 feels like admitting a weakness she was never allowed to have. And failure was never an option in the house she grew up in. That wiring is still running, which is why understanding where it came from matters more than judging where it landed her. Gen X girls came home to empty houses. That's not a metaphor. It's a Tuesday in 1983. Key under the mat, snack from the cupboard, homework at the kitchen table with the TV on for company. Parents were working, or they were gone in other ways, and the cultural message running underneath all of it was simple. Figure it out yourself. Needing people wasn't celebrated. It was inconvenient. That doesn't disappear at 55. It doesn't soften with age or dissolve once you have your own income and your own space and nobody left to answer to. It runs underneath everything, quiet and structural, shaping how she responds to a health scare she doesn't tell anyone about, how she handles a hard week by going even deeper into her routines rather than picking up the phone, how she experiences the silence on a Sunday evening when the weekend closes out and not a single person has checked on her. The AARP Friendship Study found something that captures this precisely. Women's friendships often span 20 years or more. These aren't shallow connections. They go back to college, to first jobs, to the years when everything was still being figured out. But the wire goes dead. Not because the caring stopped, but because nobody taught either woman how to maintain the connection once the shared context disappeared. Women are more likely than men to initiate emotional conversations, yes. But that skill atrophies when life gets quiet and the reasons to call stop presenting themselves naturally. She waits for a reason. The reason doesn't come. A year passes. So she manages her own finances, fixes her own problems, keeps her routines running with a precision that looks, from the outside, like a woman who has everything under control. And she can go weeks without a conversation that goes any deeper than logistics, and she'll call that independence. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's just the only mode she ever learned. There's a point where the question shifts. It stops being, do you like living alone? Because the answer to that is complicated, and she's made her peace with the complication. It becomes something quieter and harder. Does anyone actually know you're here? Not your address, not your job title, you. The version of you that exists in the hours no one sees. This isn't a failure. It's a construction, built by a specific generation, shaped by specific circumstances, reinforced by a cultural script that told her self-sufficiency was the highest thing she could be. She believed it because the evidence around her confirmed it. The cost of that belief is only visible in the moments she doesn't describe to anyone, and there are more of those than she lets on. You aren't a lone wolf because something went wrong. You're one because you were built to survive. This quiet kingdom isn't your failure. It's a construction that kept you standing when nothing else would. More than 50% of people have already clicked away, but you're still here. That means you're willing to look at the parts of yourself most people are too afraid to acknowledge. You found a piece of truth today that most will never understand. And the next video is where the real reason behind your need for control finally starts to make sense.